2007, Calgary, Canada. Oil prices are soaring. The Canadian dollar is stronger than the US dollar for the first time in 3 decades. From Toronto's glass towers to Alberta's oil sands, the world is calling Canada the new economic superpower of the West. Banks are stable, jobs are plenty, the housing market unstoppable. Canada isn't just surviving the global financial storm, it's thriving in it. Investors from Asia and the Middle East pour money into Vancouver and Toronto. Real estate oil companies expand overnight. Canadians feel untouchable. It seems like the northern giant has finally claimed its moment under the sun. America is still recovering from the dot-com crash. Europe is bracing for recession, but Canada looks like the calm giant of the Western world. The world sees a nation that has mastered balance, natural resources, strong institutions, and polite prosperity. The Economist calls it the next great model for the developed world. Headlines praise its clean banking system and responsible government. Canada isn't just surviving globalization, it's thriving in it. While other countries drown in debt, Canada's federal books are balanced. While American banks gamble on risky mortgages, Canadian banks play it safe and win. To the outside world, this feels like destiny fulfilled. The quiet northern neighbor has become the adult in the room, but behind the numbers lies something deeper. A rush, a fever, a belief that this boom would last forever. In Alberta, oil is more than energy, it's identity. Entire towns spring up overnight. Pickup trucks become status symbols. In Calgary, real estate prices rise month after month. Oil companies hand out bonuses so big, even secretaries buy vacation homes. At night, bars overflow with workers from Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, each one chasing the same dream, to strike it rich before the oil runs dry. 3 provinces west, a different kind of boom is underway. Vancouver's skyline stretches higher each year. Luxury condos sell before they're even built. Foreign investors pour money into glass towers by the sea. Locals call it the Hong Kong of the Pacific. The dream of owning a home, once part of the Canadian soul, is turning into a global commodity, but nobody questions it. Because for the first time in a long time, Canada feels rich. The dollar is strong, wages are high, oil is endless, and the rest of the world is in awe. In 2008, when the global financial crisis hits, banks collapse in New York, markets panic in London, Canada stands firm. Its banking system barely flinches. Its mortgages don't implode. The Prime Minister goes on television and declares, "Our fundamentals are strong." And he's right. For a moment, the world looks north and sees a miracle. A country that did everything right when everyone else did it wrong. Investors call it the Canadian Shield. A nation immune to the chaos beyond its borders, real estate becomes the new gold rush. From Toronto's suburbs to Calgary's downtown towers, everyone wants in. Retirees refinance. Young couples stretch their budgets, banks lend freely. Because why wouldn't they? Housing always goes up, oil always sells, and Canada always wins. Or so it seems. Because beneath that calm confidence, small cracks begin to form. Household debt quietly grows to record levels. The oil sands begin to overheat. Too many projects, too few pipelines. Manufacturing jobs in Ontario vanish as a strong dollar makes exports expensive, and economists start to whisper a warning that maybe, just maybe, Canada's miracle rests on fragile ground. But nobody listens, not yet. The city glows in gold tower. Cranes frame the horizon. To most, it still looks like the dawn of a new age, but in truth, it's the beginning of a long, cold reckoning. It's hard to believe now, but 3 decades ago, Canada was on the edge of collapse. Interest rates were high, unemployment was worse, and the world had lost faith in the maple leaf economy. The year is 1993. Moody's warns that Canada's debt could soon become unmanageable. Newspapers call it an economic disgrace. Even the Wall Street Journal labels Canada as an honorary member of the third world. The national debt has ballooned past 70% of GDP for every dollar the government collects. 38 cents go just to pay interest. Hospitals close, provinces slash budgets. It's not the Canada of confidence we know today, it's a nation on its knees. Then comes a new idea, radical, painful, but necessary. Jean Chrétien's government, guided by Finance Minister Paul Martin, makes a choice. To do what almost no other Western democracy dared to do in the 1990s, to cut its way back to balanced budgets are slashed by 20%. Thousands of government jobs vanish overnight. Public spending is rewritten from the ground up. It's austerity, Canadian style, not loud, not angry, just relentless. it hurts. Communities lose hospitals, schools, even local post offices. But slowly, the bleeding stops. By the late 1990s, the federal deficit turns into a surplus for the first time in a generation. Canada begins to look credible again. The world notices, the IMF praises it. Economists start calling it the turnaround of the decade. And just in time, because a new global era is beginning. Technology connects the planet, trade barriers fall, and countries rich in resources suddenly find themselves in demand. For Canada, this is the perfect storm. In the best possible way, the US is hungry for oil. China is industrializing at lightning speed. And deep in northern Alberta lies one of the largest untapped oil reserves on Earth, the Athabasca oil sands. Billions of barrels of bitumen, thick, heavy crude, just waiting to be unlocked. It's dirty, it's expensive, it's complicated, but it's gold. By 2002, oil companies are racing north. New towns rise out of frozen soil. Pipelines, refineries, camps, all feeding a new kind of Canadian dream. Fort McMurray, once a quiet outpost, becomes a boomtown of global headlines. Foreign workers flood in, engineers from Scotland, truck drivers from Newfoundland, investors from Texas. For a moment, the Canadian prairies feel like the new Saudi Arabia. But oil isn't the only success story. Down east, Toronto's financial district grows into a global hub. Canadian banks, once small and conservative, start expanding worldwide. The Big Five, RBC, TD, Scotiabank, BMO, and CIBC, quietly rise into some of the most stable and profitable banks on earth. Unlike Wall Street, they are heavily regulated, carefully leveraged, and painfully cautious, traits that would later save them when the world crashes in 2008. At the same time, immigration reshapes the nation. From Hong Kong, India, the Philippines, and beyond, millions arrive in search of opportunity. They bring energy, ambition, and global networks that fuel the next economic wave. The cities expand. New suburbs stretch for miles. Every crane, every truck, every new home feels like proof that Canada is no longer the humble, debt-ridden country of the past. The national psyche changes too, from cautious to confident, from surviving to thriving. And as oil wealth and housing growth fuse together, the world begins to pay attention again. In less than a decade, Canada had pulled off the unthinkable, from near bankruptcy to global respect. Balanced budgets, booming exports, rising currency, a banking system the world envied. It looked like the perfect model, a country that learned from its mistakes and built something solid, something lasting. But behind that quiet pride was a dangerous illusion that the good times could last forever. The cranes keep rising, the debt quietly grows, and Canada begins its next great chapter, the one that would make it rich, admired, and eventually vulnerable. The skyline glows with cranes and glass. Oil money flows in from Alberta. Foreign investment floods into real estate. Canada feels untouchable. The 2000s were Canada's decade. GDP growth averaging over 3% a year. Unemployment at record lows. A currency so strong it shocks the world. The loonie hits parity with the US dollar for the first time since the 1970s Canada. The polite, quiet neighbor suddenly stands as the economic envy of the G7, the world's soundest banking system, a model of fiscal discipline. Canada, the country that got it right. Even Barack Obama praises it. The IMF calls its financial sector the most stable in the world. And while the US and Europe tumble into the Great Recession of 2008, Canada barely flinches. Banks collapse in New York and London. Housing prices plummet across America. But north of the border, Canadian banks remain solid. No bailouts, no mass foreclosures. The system holds. For a brief moment, the world believed Canada had discovered economic perfection. A mix of cautious banking, strong exports, and steady immigration. A nation immune to crisis. But what the headlines missed was that Canada's miracle was being built on two fragile pillars, oil and housing. Between 2002 and 2012, global oil prices rise fivefold. Fort McMurray becomes a modern gold rush. Wages soar, restaurants pay dishwashers $25 an hour, pickup trucks line the highways. And Alberta's provincial budget, once modest, explodes with surplus cash. By 2008, oil accounts for nearly a quarter of all Canadian exports. One province, Alberta, is carrying the weight of the nation's boom. But oil wealth never stays still for long. As the money flows in, so do the temptations governments spend big. New highways, schools, hospitals, corporate tax cuts. Few think about what happens when the price of oil falls, because in the mid-2000s, it feels like it never will. While Alberta thrives on oil, Ontario and British Columbia discover a boom of their own, real estate. After the dot-com buzz of 2001, interest rates fall to historic lows. Mortgages become cheap, immigration keeps demand high, and Canadian banks, flush with confidence, start lending like never before. Entire neighborhoods appear overnight. Developers can't build fast enough. Investors flip condos before they're even finished. Between Between 2000 and 2010, home prices in Toronto and Vancouver doubled. Then AAA, typical detached home in Vancouver now costs more than one in Los Angeles. And for the first time in history, real estate overtakes manufacturing as Canada's biggest single economic driver. The shift is dramatic and dangerous. In 2005, Canada's household debt sits at 100% of disposable income. By 2010, it's 150%. By 2013, it passes 165%. Canadians are now among the most indebted people in the developed world. But few seem worried, because as long as home prices rise, everyone feels richer. A new national psychology takes root. Housing never goes down. It becomes the mantra of a generation. Parents tell their kids to buy now or be priced out forever. Banks market mortgages with minimal down payments, and governments, fearing a slowdown, keep the credit taps wide open. It's not just individuals. The economy itself starts depending on housing construction jobs, real estate commissions, renovation industries. They all feed off the same cycle. By the early 2000s, 1 in every $5 in Canada's GDP comes from housing-related activity. The world applauds. The IMF calls Canada's housing market resilient. Foreign investors pour in, buying up condos as safe havens. The government proudly touts its stability, but few notice that this stability is built on a mountain of household debt, rising property values, and an oil economy that's one crash away from disaster. Because when you build your prosperity on two volatile foundations, oil and housing, you're not building a miracle, you're building a mirage. And by the mid-2000s, the mirage begins to fade, oil prices fall, housing affordability collapses, and the cracks that were invisible during the boom suddenly begin to split the country in two. This is when the illusion of Canada's economic perfection begins to unravel. The year is 2014. After a decade of soaring prices, oil collapses from over $100 a barrel to below $50 in a matter of months. Billions in investment vanish overnight. Thousands lose their jobs. Fort McMurray, once a symbol of prosperity, now becomes a ghost town. Pickup trucks sit idle in driveways, empty work camps stretch for miles. And for the first time in a generation, Alberta faces recession. The ripple spreads fast, restaurants close, small towns empty, home prices fall. For a province that once powered Canada's dream, the reality is now cruel. Because when your wealth depends on what comes out of the ground, you live and die by its price. The crash doesn't stay in Alberta. The entire country feels it. The Canadian dollar weakens, government revenues plunge, and what had once been a blessing, high resource prices, now exposes the danger of dependence. For years, Canada had believed it could balance everything: oil and finance, exports and housing, debt and discipline. But now, one leg of the stool was gone and the others were already wobbling. While Alberta sinks, another kind of storm brews in the cities. Housing prices, which had already tripled, begin to detach completely from reality. Foreign buyers pour in. Local families are priced out, and a generation of young Canadians watches the dream of home ownership slip away. A two-bedroom home in Vancouver now sells for over $1.5 million. In Toronto, even a small condo costs more than most families can borrow. People begin stretching their finances to the limit, borrowing against equity, taking on lines of credit, betting that prices will keep rising, because for more than a decade, they always had. But this time, something changes. Incomes stagnate, debt piles up, and by 2017, Canadian household debt crosses 170% of disposable income, the highest in the entire G7. Every percentage point of interest rate increase now threatens to collapse thousands of family budgets. The Bank of Canada faces a brutal dilemma: keep rates low and risk inflating the bubble even more, raise them, and risk triggering a recession. So the country hesitates. Policy lags behind reality, and the bubble keeps inflating. At the same time, another quiet shift takes place: the divide between generations. Those who bought homes in the 1990s and 2000s become millionaires overnight. Those born after 1990 can barely afford rent. Two Canadas begin to form, one of asset owners and one of debtors. In the big cities, wealth glitters behind glass towers, but beyond them, industries fade. Manufacturing declines, rural economies shrink, and even as GDP grows on paper, millions feel poorer than ever before. The Canadian dream, once built on fairness and balance, starts to feel hollow. The oil crash exposed one weakness. The housing bubble reveals another. Now, the question becomes, what happens when both fail at once? By the late 2010s, the signs are everywhere. Household debt hits record highs, wages can't keep up with prices, and cities once praised as livable become symbols of frustration. Then comes the final shock. In March 2020, the world shuts down, oil demand collapses again. Entire sectors freeze, and for the first time since the Great Depression, Canada faces a synchronized national crisis: economic, social, and emotional. To survive, governments open the money taps, billions flow into stimulus programs, interest rates drop to zero, debt explodes faster than ever before, but instead of healing the system, it supercharges the same old weaknesses. Housing prices surge again. speculation returns, and by 2021, a detached home in Toronto now costs over $1.2 million, the highest in Canadian history. The very crisis that should have reset the system only made it more distorted, because in Canada, every downturn now seems to end the same way. More debt, more inflation, more dependence on housing. The miracle that once made Canada a global model has quietly turned into a trap. The oil crash revealed its fragility. The housing crisis exposed its imbalance, and the pandemic sealed the illusion. Canada, the land once praised for stability, now finds itself facing a question it never expected to ask. What happens when the most stable economy in the world was never truly stable at all? That question isn't just economic anymore, it's personal. Because by the 2020s, every Canadian feels the weight of the system pressing down. A generation raised to believe in education and hard work now faces the harsh math of modern Canada. Even with 2 good jobs, buying a home feels impossible. Wages rise by 2%, house prices rise by 20%, dreams shrink, apartments fill, and the middle class, once Canada's proud backbone, starts to erode. It's not just the young who feel it. Retirees watch as their children struggle. Families rely on intergenerational wealth just to survive. And the same nation that once promised equal opportunity for all now rewards only those who already have assets. The Canadian promise, fairness, stability, decency, is now colliding with cold arithmetic. At the same time, governments face their own reckoning. Federal debt surges past $1 trillion. Interest payments eat away at budgets. Public services strain under inflation. And yet, cutting spending risks collapse. It's the same problem, scaled up. A household built on cheap credit has now become a country built on it too. By 2022, the world changes again. Inflation surges, the highest in 40 years. The Bank of Canada is forced to act. Rates rise, mortgages reset, and the fragile balance snaps. For decades, cheap credit had been the wind at Canada's back. Now, it turns into a headwind. Households that borrowed heavily during the pandemic face payments doubling, even tripling. New buyers vanish. Sales collapse. And for the first time in a generation, home prices begin to fall. The mood shifts from euphoria to fear. The unspoken question returns: what if housing can go down? Because if that happens, it won't just be homeowners who lose, it'll be the entire economy. Construction slows, consumer spending weakens, confidence drops, and the economy begins to creak under its own weight. Meanwhile, oil prices stay unpredictable. The global energy transition threatens Alberta's future, and the industries that once powered Canada's miracle now look outdated in a world of change. People start to question everything. How did a country so rich in resources, talent, and potential end up here, trapped by its own success? How did safe and boring Canada become one of the most expensive places to live on Earth? And why does it feel like every generation after the boomers is inheriting less, not more? The reckoning isn't just economic, it's psychological. For decades, Canadians defined themselves by moderation. Never as reckless as America, never as complacent as Europe. They prided themselves on prudence, on common sense, on decency. But now, that self-image is cracking. Because when a society measures success by debt and speculation, decency alone can't hold it together. Politics follows the fracture. Generations turn against each other. Younger voters demand change. Rent control, housing reform, wealth taxes. Older voters defend what they've earned. The calm, polite Canada of the 1990s now finds itself in a loud, bitter argument about who broke the system and who will pay for fixing it. This is the true reckoning. Not just numbers on a chart, but a nation realizing that the miracle it believed in was built on sand. For decades, Canada lived off a formula that worked: resource exports, immigration, housing, and low rates. But now, every part of that formula is under pressure. Oil is uncertain. Immigration strains infrastructure. Housing is unaffordable. Debt is unsustainable. The model that once made Canada rich no longer fits the world it's in. The miracle is over, but the story isn't, because every fall carries the seed of renewal. And in the silence that follows the crash, a question begins to echo across the frozen nation. Can Canada reinvent itself before the weight of its own success pulls it under? It's not the first time the country has faced that question. In the 1990s, it stood on the edge of bankruptcy. In the 1980s, it battled inflation. And in the 1930s, it fought to rebuild from the Great Depression. Every time, it found a way forward. Not by luck, but by learning the same hard lesson over and over again. Stability is never permanent. Today, Canada stands at another crossroads. One path leads deeper into the cycle of speculation, endless debt, and inflated housing dreams. The other towards something harder, slower, but lasting. A new economy, a new mindset, a new Canada. The first step is honesty, to admit that the miracle wasn't really a miracle, it was momentum, and momentum can fade. The second step is courage, to stop chasing easy growth through credit and consumption and start investing in what creates real wealth, innovation, productivity, and skills. A generation of Canadians is already building that future. Clean tech startups in Alberta, AI research labs in Montreal, quantum computing teams in Waterloo, Indigenous entrepreneurs reshaping the North's economy. These are the quiet revolutions that could redefine what Canada means in the 21st century. But innovation alone isn't enough, because a country is more than its balance sheet. It's a promise that ordinary people can build decent lives from honest work. And right now, that promise is broken. If Canada is to rise again, it must rebuild that promise. Not with subsidies or slogans, but with fairness. Affordable homes built faster, wages that grow with productivity, policies that reward work, not speculation, and a government willing to challenge the culture of easy debt that's defined a generation. Because a miracle isn't when the numbers look good, it's when the people believe again, when they feel that effort matters, that saving has meaning, that tomorrow can be better than today. That's what built the Canada of the past, and it's what must build the Canada of the future. There's still strength in the land, still faith in the people, still decency in the culture. What's needed now is direction and discipline. If the 2000s were the decade of abundance and the 2010s the decade of illusion, then the 2020s must become the decade of rebuilding, not chasing another boom, but learning to live within our means to grow smarter, not faster. Because Canada doesn't need another miracle, it needs maturity. And maybe that's the real transformation. Not a miracle of money, but a miracle of mindset. A Canada that learns from its fall and rises, not richer, but wiser.